The setting in the protagonist's London in the 1960s was a city in transition, a place where the echoes of tradition clashed with the rising tide of modernity. The streets, once dominated by the rigid structure of Victorian architecture, now bore the marks of a society in flux. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke, but beneath the soot, the city pulsed with a new energy, new ideas, new voices, and new dangers. It was a time when the rigid hierarchies of the past were beginning to crack, yet the weight of history still clung to the city like a shroud. The Thames, once a symbol of the nation's grandeur, now reflected the uneasy undercurrents of a changing world, where secrets lurked beneath the surface of polite conversation. At the heart of this shifting landscape was Inspector Adam Harcourt, a man whose presence was as unassuming as it was formidable. He had spent years navigating the labyrinth of London's criminal underworld, his reputation built on a mind as sharp as a scalpel and a demeanor as unyielding as the city itself. He was not a man prone to sentiment, nor was he one to be swayed by the emotions that often clouded the judgment of his colleagues. Where others saw a mystery as a puzzle to be solved, Harcourt saw it as a series of interlocking pieces, each one revealing a fragment of a deeper truth. His work was meticulous, his methods unorthodox, and his results often unsettling. He had a reputation for uncovering the most elusive of crimes, but it was the personal toll of his work that set him apart from the rest. The case that now consumed him was unlike any he had encountered before. It was not the usual matter of theft or violence, but something far more insidious, something that touched on the very nature of human desire and the destructive power of obsession. The disappearance of Eleanor Vane had sent ripples through the city, her absence a void that no one could explain. She had been a woman of quiet strength, a figure who moved through the city with an air of quiet confidence. Her presence felt even in the most crowded of places. Those who knew her spoke of her in hushed tones, as if she were a ghost who had never truly been there. And yet, her absence was undeniable, her disappearance a mystery that refused to be solved, as Harcourt prepared to delve into the enigma. That was Eleanor Vane. He could not shake the feeling that this case was different. It was not merely a matter of solving a crime. It was a matter of understanding the forces that had driven a woman to vanish without a trace. The city, with its ever-shifting tides, was a place of secrets, and Harcourt had long since learned that the most dangerous mysteries were those that concealed not just the truth, but the very essence of human nature itself. The enigmatic Eleanor Vane, had been a woman of contradictions. Quiet yet commanding, reserved yet deeply perceptive, she had lived on the fringes of society, a presence felt more than seen, her name whispered in the corridors of art galleries and the salons of London's elite. A former art critic, she had once wielded her pen with the precision of a surgeon, dissecting the works of the great and the obscure with an unrelenting eye for detail. Her reviews had shaped the careers of many, elevating some to fame and sending others into obscurity. Yet, in the years leading up to her disappearance, she had withdrawn from public life, retreating into the shadows of her own existence. Those who had known her spoke of her in tones laced with both admiration and unease. She had been a woman of few words, her silences often more revealing than her speech. Her relationships had been as enigmatic as her writing, marked by a strange duality, intimate yet distant, affectionate yet unattainable. It was said that she had once been in love, though the details of that relationship had long since faded into the recesses of memory. Some claimed she had been abandoned, others that she had abandoned those who had loved her. No one could say for certain, and that ambiguity only deepened the mystery that now surrounded her. Her disappearance had been sudden, almost as if she had simply ceased to exist. There had been no signs of struggle, no indication of a forced departure. Her apartment had been left in a state of quiet disarray, as though she had left in the middle of a task, never to return. The few personal effects she had left behind bore no clues, no notes, no messages, no indication of where she had gone or why. It was as though she had simply vanished, leaving behind only the echoes of her presence. The city, ever watchful, had taken note of her absence. Her name had once been spoken with reverence, but now it was spoken with a hushed curiosity, as if the very act of her disappearance had become a puzzle that no one could solve. The art world had mourned her loss, but not in the way one would expect. There had been no grand tributes, no public outpourings of grief. Instead, there had been a strange sense of unease, as though the city itself had felt the absence of a presence that had once been so quietly powerful. Inspector Harcourt, ever the keen observer, had taken note of the peculiar nature of Eleanor's disappearance. It was not the kind of case that lent itself to the usual patterns of investigation. There were no witnesses, no leads, no obvious suspects. It was as if the very absence of a presence that had once been so quietly powerful. Inspector Harcourt, ever the keen observer, had mourned her loss but note of the peculiar nature of Eleanor's disappearance. It was not the kind of case that lent its rivality had been Dustin's, 40-hectared. Yet there was something about the case that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. It was not just the mystery of her disappearance that intrigued him. It was the way in which her very existence seemed to have been erased, as though she had never been there at all. The people around Eleanor, Eleanor Vane's disappearance had not come as a complete surprise to those who knew her best, though no one could have predicted the manner in which it had occurred. Among those who had once been close to her were three individuals whose lives had been irrevocably altered by her presence: Victor Langley, her estranged husband; Margaret Hargrove, a former lover; and Dr. Evelyn Thorne, her therapist. Each of them had played a role in Eleanor's life, though the nature of their relationships had been as complex as the woman herself. Now, as the mystery of her disappearance deepened, their pasts were being scrutinized with a new and unsettling intensity. Victor Langley had once been a man of ambition, a rising figure in the world of finance. He had met Eleanor in the early years of their marriage, a time when she had still been a prominent voice in the art world. He had admired her intellect, her sharp wit, and the way she had commanded the attention of those around her. But as the years had passed, their relationship had become strained, their once cordial partnership eroded by unspoken resentments and an ever-growing distance. By the time of her disappearance, they had been separated for nearly a year, their last conversation having ended in a bitter argument that neither had spoken of since. Victor Langley had once been a man of ambition, a fok, and he fockered might region. No clear explanation for her vanishing, but he had always believed that Eleanor had left of her own accord, unwilling to be bound by the expectations of a life that no longer suited her. Yet, as Inspector Harcourt delved into the case, he found that Victor's version of events was far from the only possibility. Margaret Hargrove had been a different kind of presence in Eleanor's life. She had once been a muse, a woman whose passion for art had been both a source of inspiration and a point of contention. Their relationship had been one of deep emotional entanglement, a bond that had defied the boundaries of friendship and something more. Margaret had never been able to let go of Eleanor, even after their paths had diverged. She had once been a vesture of fascination and despair as Eleanor had withdrawn from the world, retreating into a silence that had left Margaret with no clear answers. Some had whispered that Eleanor had left Margaret behind, but others had claimed that Margaret had been the one who had let her go. Either way, Margaret had become a figure of quiet obsession, her presence in the investigation more than just that of a concerned friend. Dr. Evelyn Thorne had been the final piece of the puzzle, the woman who had once provided Eleanor with a sanctuary of sorts. Their sessions had been few, but they had been intense, filled with the kind of revelations that only came with time. Dr. Thorne had known Eleanor in a way that few others had, and it was she who had first raised the alarm when Eleanor had ceased to appear for her. Appointments. She had been the one who had noticed the subtle changes in Eleanor's demeanor, the way she had grown more distant, more withdrawn. And yet, even she had been unable to prevent what had come to pass. Now, as the investigation continued, Dr. Thorne found herself caught between the need to understand what had happened and the fear that the truth might be something she was not prepared to face. Each of them had their own reasons for being involved in the case, their own reasons for wanting to know what had become of Eleanor. But as Inspector Harcourt listened to their stories, he could not shake the feeling that they were not the only ones who had been affected by her disappearance. There was something deeper at play, something that had not yet come to light, and in the quiet spaces between their words, he could feel the weight of a mystery that was only beginning to reveal itself. "The investigation begins!" Inspector Harcourt moved through the dimly lit corridors of Eleanor Vane's apartment with the practiced precision of a man who had long since learned the value of silence. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and the faintest trace of lavender, a fragrance that once had been a comfort but now felt like a cruel reminder of what had been lost. The apartment was a study in quiet disorder, furniture arranged with an almost deliberate asymmetry, as though Eleanor had left in the middle of an unfinished task. A single lamp cast a soft glow over the room, illuminating the scattered remnants of a life that had once been a comfort but now felt like a cruel reminder of what had been lost. The apartment was a study in quiet disorder, furniture arranged with a Eleanor Vane's. "Host! What?" Harcourt began his examination with the usual methodical approach, his mind working through the possibilities even as his eyes scanned the details before him. He noted the absence of any signs of a struggle, the lack of forced entry, and the way in which the apartment seemed untouched by the passage of time. It was not the kind of scene that suggested a violent departure, nor one that hinted at a sudden and desperate escape. Instead, it was as if Eleanor had simply stepped away, leaving behind the echoes of her presence. He moved to the desk, where a collection of papers lay in a disordered pile. Among them, he found a series of notes, some written in Eleanor's own hand, others in a script that was unfamiliar. The words were cryptic, filled with allusions that made little sense to anyone who did not know the woman who had written them. One note, in particular, caught his attention. "The mirror does not lie, but it does not speak either." It was a phrase that, for reasons he could not yet explain, unsettled him. He placed it aside and continued his search. In the bedroom, he found a small wooden box tucked beneath the bed. Inside was a collection of photographs, some of which were faded with age, others still sharp and clear. They depicted Eleanor in various stages of her life, some taken in the height of her career, others from a time when she had been younger, her face unguarded by the weight of the world. But it was not the photographs themselves that intrigued Harcourt. The mirror does not the photographs themselves, the mirror does not lie. But it does not lie. But it does not speak either. In chronological order, nor were they grouped by subject. Instead, they seemed to be arranged according to a pattern that only Eleanor would have understood. He turned his attention to the closet, where he found a collection of clothing that had been carefully folded and placed in neat rows. There was no sign of a hurried departure, no indication that Eleanor had left in a state of panic or fear. If she had vanished, it had not been in a moment of desperation, and yet the absence of her presence was undeniable. As he stepped back from the room, Harcourt could not shake the feeling that he was missing something. The apartment was too quiet, too still. There was no sense of urgency in the way the objects were arranged, no indication that Eleanor had left in a state of panic or fear. If she had vanished, it had not been in a moment of desperation. Yet the absence of her presence was undeniable. Rush! It was as though she had simply walked away, leaving behind a life that had once been so carefully constructed. He made his way to the door, his mind already working through the possibilities. He would need to speak to those who had known Eleanor best, to see if any of them could offer insight into the mystery that now consumed him. He had a feeling that the answers he sought would not be found in the silence of the apartment, but in the words of those who had once been close to her. And as he stepped into the night, the weight of the case settled upon him once more. The shadows of obsession. As Inspector Harcourt delved deeper into the enigma of Eleanor Vane's disappearance, he found himself drawn into a web of relationships that were as intricate as they were unsettling. Each of the individuals who had known Eleanor had been touched by the specter of obsession in their own way, their lives shaped by the intensity of their emotions and the weight of their desires. It was a theme that had long haunted the city, a shadow that had followed Eleanor through the corridors of her life, and now, it seemed, it had consumed her entirely. Victor Langley, Eleanor's estranged husband, had once been a man who had believed in the power of love. His marriage to Eleanor had been a union of intellect and passion, a partnership that had seemed unbreakable in its early years. But as time had worn on, the love that had once bound them had turned into something else, something more possessive, more desperate. Victor had never been able to let go of Eleanor, even as she had drifted further from him. He had watched her retreat into the silence of her own mind, her once vibrant presence fading into a shadow of its former self. And now, as he stood before Harcourt, his eyes were filled with a mixture of grief and something else, something that looked very much like guilt. Margaret Hargrove, Eleanor's former lover, had been a different kind of presence in Eleanor's life. Their relationship had been one of deep emotional entanglement, a bond that had defied the boundaries of friendship and something more. Margaret had always been consumed by Eleanor, her love for her a force that had shaped her very existence. She had once believed that Eleanor had chosen her, that she had been the one who had made Eleanor feel whole. But, as Eleanor had withdrawn from the world, Margaret had been left with nothing but the echoes of a love that had once been so consuming. Now, as Harcourt questioned her, he could see the pain in her eyes, the way she clung to the memory of Eleanor as if it were the only thing that had ever given her meaning. Dr. Evelyn Thorne, Eleanor's therapist, had been the final piece of the puzzle. She had known Eleanor in a way that few others had, and it was she who had first raised the alarm when Eleanor had ceased to appear for her appointments. She had watched as Eleanor had grown more distant, more withdrawn, her once vibrant spirit dimmed by something that even she could not understand. And yet, even now, Dr. Thorne could not shake the feeling that Eleanor had been consumed by something that had eluded her grasp. Harcourt could not help but feel the weight of these relationships pressing upon him. He had always believed that love was a force that could bring people together, that it was the most powerful of all human emotions. But as he listened to the stories of those who had known Eleanor, he could not shake the feeling that love had also been the thing that had driven her to the edge. It was a cruel irony that the very thing that had once given Eleanor strength had also been the thing that had once given Eleanor strength, had also been the thing that had ultimately led to her disappearance. And as he stood in the dim light of Eleanor's apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had once been so carefully constructed, Harcourt could not help but wonder what it was that had finally broken Eleanor. Was it the weight of her own obsessions, or had she simply been consumed by the love that had once defined her? The answers, he knew, would not come easily, but he would find them, no matter the cost. The unraveling threads. As Inspector Harcourt continued his investigation, the pieces of the puzzle began to take shape, each revelation more unsettling than the last. The first clue came in the form of a hidden journal, tucked away in a drawer beneath Eleanor's desk. Its pages were filled with fragmented thoughts, cryptic notes, and a series of names that seemed to be connected in ways that defied immediate understanding. The journal spoke of a recurring motif, the mirror, a symbol that appeared in almost every entry. Harcourt could not ignore the weight of the word, its presence, a haunting reminder of the mystery that had consumed Eleanor. He turned his attention to the notes found in Eleanor's apartment, their meanings elusive yet tantalizing. One of them read, "The mirror reflects what we do not wish to see, but it cannot change what we have become." This line struck Harcourt with a sense of foreboding, as if it were a warning of the very thing that had driven Eleanor to the edge. He could not help but wonder what it was that she had seen in the mirror that had led her to this point. Was it a reflection of her own flaws, or something far more sinister? Harcourt's thoughts were interrupted by a visit from Victor Langley, who arrived at the precinct with a mixture of anxiety and determination. He had been eager to speak, to share what he knew, but as he recounted the details of his relationship with Eleanor, his voice trembled with emotion. He spoke of the late nights they had spent together, the way she had once been full of life, but how she had gradually withdrawn from him, her eyes clouded with something he could not name. Victor's words were laced with a sense of guilt, as if he believed he had somehow contributed to her disappearance. Harcourt listened intently, noting the way Victor's hands shook slightly as he spoke. There was a desperation in his voice, a longing for answers that Harcourt could not yet provide. He pressed him for more details, asking about the last time they had seen each other. Victor's face fell, and for a moment the room seemed to hold. He spoke of the listened intently, noting the way Victor's hands shook slightly as he spoke. Its breath. It was a few weeks before she vanished, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We had a fight, something about her work. I told her she was wasting her time, that she should have been more ambitious. She looked at me like I had betrayed her. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Harcourt could feel the weight of the moment, the realization that Eleanor's disappearance had not been a sudden event, but rather the culmination of a series that had been building for years. He could not shake the feeling that Victor's words were more than just a confession. They were a glimpse into a deeper truth that he had yet to uncover. Meanwhile, Margaret Hargrove had been in contact with Harcourt. Harcourt could feel the weight of the moment, the realization that Eleanor's disappearance had not been a sudden event, but rather the culmination of a series stocks that had been building for years. He could not shake the feeling that Victor's words were more than just a confession. They were a glimpse into a deeper truth that he had yet to uncover. She had come to the precinct with a sense of urgency, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. I think I know what happened to her, she said, her voice trembling. She was obsessed with something she couldn't let go of. Her words echoed in Harcourt's mind, the weight of her confession pressing against him. He could feel the threads of their lives weaving together, each one pulling him deeper into the mystery. As the investigation continued, Harcourt found himself grappling with the very nature of obsession. It was a force that had shaped the lives of those around him, a shadow that had followed Eleanor through the corridors of her existence. He could not help but feel the pull of the case, the way it had begun to consume him as well. It was not just a matter of solving a crime. It was a matter of understanding the very essence of human desire and the destructive power it could wield. The deeper he delved into the case, the more he felt the weight of the mirror's reflection on his own life. He had always believed that love was a force that could bring people together, but now he was beginning to question that belief. Was it possible that love could also be a prison, a chain that bound people to their own desires and fears? The thought lingered in his mind as he prepared for the next steps in the investigation, aware that the answers he sought would not come easily, and that the path ahead would be fraught with uncertainty. The mirror's reflection. The rain had begun to fall in a steady rhythm, the kind that seemed to echo the pulse of the city itself. Inspector Harcourt stood at the edge of the abandoned art gallery, the remnants of Eleanor Vane's life scattered before him like pieces of a shattered mirror. The building, once a beacon of creativity and inspiration, now stood in decay, its windows boarded, its doors rusted shut. It was a place that had once been filled with the whispers of artists and the laughter of lovers, and yet now it was a tomb of forgotten dreams. Harcourt could almost hear the echoes of Eleanor's voice, the way she had once spoken of the gallery as a sanctuary, a place where she had felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. As he stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and how gallery, the remnants of Eleanor Vane's life scattered before him like voisins. Harcourt could almost hear the echoes of Eleanor's voice, the way she had once booked. Decay, the silence oppressive. The gallery was a labyrinth of shadows, the once vibrant colors of the artworks now dulled by time. Harcourt moved cautiously, his flashlight casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. It was here, in this forgotten space, that he felt the weight of Eleanor's disappearance most acutely. The silence was not just the absence of sound, it was the absence of her presence, a void that seemed to stretch infinitely. He had come to this place with a single purpose, to find Eleanor, to confront the mystery that had consumed her life. But as he wandered through the gallery, he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the very walls held secrets that had yet to be uncovered. It was as if the gallery itself was a character in this unfolding drama, first, silent witness to the events that had transpired. Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, Harcourt found himself standing before a large mirror that had once been the centerpiece of the gallery. It was a grand, ornate piece, its frame intricately carved with symbols that seemed to whisper of love and obsession. The mirror reflected not just his image, but something deeper, an echo of Eleanor's own reflections, the way she had once gazed into it, searching for answers that had eluded her. As he stood before the mirror, Harcourt felt a strange sense of connection, as though the mirror was a portal to Eleanor's soul. He could see her, not in the physical sense, but in the way her presence lingered in the air, in the way the shadows danced around him. He could almost hear her voice, a soft murmur that spoke of love and the weight of obsession. "What you see in the mirror is not the truth," she seemed to say, "but a reflection of your own desires." The words struck Harcourt with a sense of urgency, a realization that the mirror was not just a reflection of Eleanor, but a symbol of the very nature of love and obsession that had consumed her. He felt a pang of guilt, a recognition that in his pursuit of the truth, he had become entangled in the same web of desire that had ensnared Eleanor. It was a cruel irony that the very thing that had driven her to the edge was now the same force that had drawn him into her world. As he stepped closer to the mirror, he could see the faint outline of Eleanor's face, as if it were etched into the glass. Her eyes, once full of life, now seemed to hold a deep sadness, a reflection of the pain that had led her to this moment. Harcourt could not look away. He felt as though he were standing on the precipice of a revelation that would change everything. Suddenly, the mirror shimmered, and in that moment he saw her. Eleanor stood before him, her presence both haunting and beautiful. She was not the same woman he had known, but a version of her that had been shaped by the very forces of love and obsession that had consumed her. "You've come to find me," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness of the gallery. "But you must understand, love is a double-edged sword. It can heal, the bow, but it can also destroy." Harcourt felt a wave of emotion wash over him, a mixture of fear and understanding. He could see the truth of her words, the way they resonated with the very essence of the case he had been investigating. It was not just about Eleanor, it was about the nature of love itself, the way it could bind people together, yet also tear them apart. As he stood before her, he felt the weight of the mirror's reflection on his own life, the way it had shaped his understanding of love and obsession. In that moment, he realized that the mystery of Eleanor Vane was not just about her disappearance. It was about the very nature of the human experience, the way love and obsession could intertwine to create a tapestry of emotions, could both uplift and destroy. And as the rain continued to fall outside, Harcourt knew that the answers he sought would not come easily, but they would be worth the journey. The truth revealed. Inspector Harcourt stood in the dim light of the abandoned gallery, the weight of the moment pressing upon him. Eleanor Vane was before him, not as a ghost of the past, but as a woman who had been shaped by the very forces that had driven her to the edge. The mirror, once a symbol of reflection, now seemed to hold the key to the mystery that had consumed her life. He could see the truth in her eyes, a truth that had eluded him until now. "I was never meant to disappear," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I was meant to be found." Harcourt took a step forward, his mind racing with the implications of her words. He had spent weeks unraveling the threads of her life, following the echoes of her relationships, the remnants of a love that had once been so consuming. And yet the truth had remained just out of reach, like a reflection that could never be grasped. Now, standing before her, he felt as though he had finally reached the heart of the matter. "You were consumed by your own obsession," Harcourt said, his voice measured, but laced with something that felt like understanding. "You saw yourself in the mirror, but what you saw was not the truth. It was a reflection of your own desires, your inflection that could never be grasped." Eleanor's expression did not change, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Relief, perhaps, or the realization that she had finally been understood. "Love is not just a force that binds us," she said, her voice softer now. "It is a force that can also trap us. I believed that if I could love deeply enough, I could find meaning in my life. But in the end, I only found myself." Harcourt could not help but feel the weight of her words. He had always believed that love was a force that could bring people together, that it was the most powerful of all human emotions. But now, standing before Eleanor, he saw the other side of that truth, the way love could also be a prison, a chain that bound people to their own desires and fears. He thought of Victor Langley, the man who had once believed he could hold Eleanor in his arms, only to watch as she slipped through his fingers. He thought of Margaret Hargrove, the woman who had clung to Eleanor with an intensity that had bordered on desperation. And he thought of Dr. Evelyn Thorne, the woman who had tried to guide Eleanor through the labyrinth of her own mind, only to find that the answers she sought had been hidden in the very thing that had consumed her. And now, standing before Eleanor, he saw that the truth was not just about her disappearance. It was about the nature of love itself, about the way it could shape and destroy, the way it could bring people together and tear them apart. It was a truth that had been hidden in plain sight, buried beneath the layers of obsession, and desire that had defined Eleanor's life. As the rain continued to fall outside, Harcourt felt a strange sense of closure. He had come to this place seeking answers, but he had found something far greater. He had come to understand that love was not just a force that bound people together. It was a force that could also define them, that could shape their very existence. And in the end, it was not the love that had consumed Eleanor that had been the most important. It was the love that had allowed her to find herself again. Eleanor took a step forward, her gaze steady. "You have found me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the truth is not just about me. It is about all of us, about the way we love, the way we are consumed by it. It is about the choices we make, the paths we take." Harcourt looked at her, and for the first time, he understood that the mystery of Eleanor Vane was not just about her disappearance, it was about the very nature of love itself, and as the mirror reflected their images back at them, he knew that the truth would remain with him, a truth that would shape the rest of his life, the echoes of love and obsession. As Inspector Harcourt stood before Eleanor Vane, the weight of the case settled upon him like a shroud. The mystery had not only revealed the truth of Eleanor's disappearance, but had also forced him to confront the very nature of love and obsession that had shaped her life and obsession that had shaped her life, and in many ways his own. The mirror, once a symbol of reflection, had become something more, a testament to the duality of human emotion, the way it could both illuminate and obscure, the way it could bind and break. Eleanor had not vanished into the void of oblivion as some had feared. She had not been lost to the abyss of despair, nor had she been the victim of a crime that could not be solved. Instead, she had chosen to step away, to retreat into the silence that had surrounded her for so long. And in that silence she had found a form of peace, even if it had come at a great cost. Harcourt had always believed that love was a force that could bring people together, that it was the most powerful of all human emotions. But now, standing before Eleanor, he saw that love could also be a prison, a chain that bound people to their own desires and fears. He thought of Victor Langley, the man who had once believed he could hold Eleanor in his arms only to watch as she slipped through his fingers. He thought of Margaret Hargrove, the woman who had clung to Eleanor with an intensity that had bordered on desperation. And he thought of Dr. Evelyn Thorne, the woman who had tried to guide Eleanor through the labyrinth of her own mind, only to find that the answers she sought had been hidden in the very thing that had consumed her. Each of them had been shaped by the forces of love and obsession, their lives entwined with Eleanor's in ways that had left them changed forever. And now, as Harcourt looked into Eleanor's eyes, he saw that she had not been consumed by the forces that had shaped her life. She had been shaped by them, yes, but she had also found a way to break free. She had not been lost to the mirror's reflection, but she had found a way to look beyond it. She had seen the truth of herself, the way love had shaped her, the way it had both defined and destroyed her. And in that understanding, she had found a form of peace that had eluded her for so long. The rain continued to fall outside, the city of London still wrapped in its ever-shifting layers of mystery and revelation. Harcourt knew that the case would not be remembered for the crime that had been solved, nor for the disappearance that had been uncovered. It would be remembered for the way it had forced him to confront the very nature of love and obsession, for the way it had shown him that even the most elusive of mysteries could be understood if one was willing to look beyond the surface. As he turned to leave the abandoned gallery, the mirror still standing behind him, Harcourt felt a strange sense of closure. The case was over, but its echoes would remain with him for the rest of his life. And as he stepped into the rain, he knew that the mystery of Eleanor Vane had not only changed her, it had changed him as well. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Hit the notification bell to be notified of new stories when they become available. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me if you enjoyed the story and want to hear more like it.